I used to think that the most dangerous thing for Washington was a single superpower rival. I was wrong. The real nightmare isn't one giant, it's two wounded, heavily armed outcasts finally deciding to stop playing by the rules and start playing for keeps. While most of the world was looking at the front lines in Ukraine or the latest skirmish in the Middle East, a massive, quiet shift happened right under our noses. It's a deal signed in shadows, a handshake between the Kremlin and Tehran that has effectively ended the era of American isolation tactics. Suddenly, the weapons that were supposed to be outdated are evolving, and the intelligence gaps we used to exploit are closing. I've spent weeks digging into the classified patterns of this military marriage, and what I found is terrifying. Russia and Iran aren't just trading drones and oil anymore. They are merging their military destinies. And for Washington, this isn't just another foreign policy headache. It's the moment the global chessboard flipped. If you want to understand why the Pentagon is currently in a quiet state of panic, you have to look at what's actually crossing the Caspian Sea. It started with the Shahed drones, which we all saw on the news, cheap buzzing lawnmowers that redefined modern warfare. But that was just the first date. Right now, we are seeing the dowry phase. Russia, once the proud exporter of top-tier tech, is now so desperate for mass-produced attrition weapons that they've handed over the keys to their most guarded secrets. We're talking about Su-35 fighter jets, some of the most maneuverable planes on the planet, landing on Iranian soil. Think about that. For decades, the US and its allies maintained a massive technological edge in the Middle East. That edge just evaporated. When I look at the satellite imagery of these new joint production facilities, I don't see a simple trade. I see the birth of a new high-tech arsenal of autocracy that doesn't care about sanctions because they've built their own world. But the exchange isn't just one way. It's a symbiotic loop that's making both militaries smarter every single day. In the past, if Russia or Iran developed a new piece of hardware, it would take years of drills to see if it actually worked. Now, they have a live-fire laboratory. Every time an Iranian-designed missile or drone is launched in a conflict zone, the data flows right back to Tehran and Moscow. They are patching their weapons like software updates in real time. I've noticed that the latest versions of these systems are specifically being redesigned to bypass the exact electronic warfare suites that the US relies on. They are literally crowdsourcing the destruction of Western defense systems. And it gets deeper than just hardware. I'm talking about a total integration of dark logistics. They've built what I call a sanction-proof corridor. By connecting their banking systems and using the Caspian Sea as a private highway, they've created a supply chain that Washington's satellites can watch, but Washington's lawyers can't touch. When I look at the movement of specialists between these two countries, it's clear they aren't just sharing blueprints, they are sharing people. Russian engineers are teaching Iranians how to harden their silos against bunker busters, while Iranian experts are showing the Russians how to mass-produce advanced composite materials on a budget. This isn't just cooperation, it's a merger. They are building a unified military machine designed specifically to find the off switch for American influence in both Europe and the Middle East simultaneously. This brings us to the most chilling part of this alliance, the nuclear shadow. For years, the global strategy was to keep Iran in a box, using a combination of economic pressure and the threat of conventional strikes. But that box just had its back door ripped open. I'm seeing reports of Russian scientists, the same ones who maintained the world's largest nuclear stockpile, now consulting on projects deep within the Iranian mountains. This isn't just about a bomb, it's about hypersonics. If Russia hands over the propulsion technology for hypersonic missiles, the entire defensive shield of the US Navy becomes obsolete overnight. We are talking about missiles that move so fast they can't be intercepted by current Aegis or Patriot systems. I've been tracking the diplomatic shifts, and the message from Moscow is clear. If the West continues to provide high-end precision weapons to Russia's enemies, Russia will provide the ultimate equalizer to Washington's. It's a game of geopolitical hostage. By modernizing Iran's air defenses with the S-400 system, Russia has essentially made a preemptive strike on Iranian nuclear facilities nearly impossible without a full-scale catastrophic war. They've effectively created a sanctuary for Tehran. This means the U.S. no longer has a low-cost option to stop Iran's regional ambitions. Every move Washington makes in the Middle East now has to be checked against how the Kremlin might retaliate in Europe, and vice versa. The two fronts have become one, and the strategic flexibility that the U.S. enjoyed for 30 years has effectively vanished. This leads to a terrifying realization. The red line has moved. For decades, the West operated under the assumption that if things got too heated, we could simply turn off the global financial taps or use our technological superiority to freeze these nations in place. But I'm seeing the exact opposite happening. By pooling their resources, Russia and Iran are creating a parallel reality. They are launching their own satellites together, sharing space-based surveillance that can track U.S. carrier strike groups in real time. This isn't just about defending their own borders anymore. It's about projecting power into the gaps we leave behind. I've been watching the movement in the global south, and the ripple effect is massive. Other nations are seeing this marriage of convenience and realizing that there is now a viable alternative to the Western military umbrella. When Russia and Iran hold joint naval drills in the Indian Ocean, they aren't just practicing, they are auditioning. They are showing the world that the rules-based order is now a rules-negotiated order. The most dangerous part of this for Washington isn't just the missiles or the jets, it's the fact that our primary weapon, deterrence, is losing its teeth. We used to say, don't do this or else. Now they're looking back and saying, or else what? They've found each other, and in doing so, they've found a way to make the American century feel like a closing chapter. The real kicker, the thing that keeps analysts up at night, is that we can't just diplomacy our way out of this one anymore. In the past, you could play one against the other, offering a carrot to Moscow to isolate Tehran or vice versa. But that bridge has been burned. I've looked at the rhetoric coming out of both capitals, and it's no longer about temporary gains. It's about a shared survival instinct. They've realized that as long as they stand alone, they can be broken. But together, they represent a continuous landmass of resistance stretching from the Baltic Sea to the Persian Gulf. I started this investigation wondering if Washington had a plan to counter this, but the deeper I went, the more I realized the plan is failing because the old playbook is obsolete. You can't sanction a country that is trading in a currency you don't control, using ships you can't track, and sharing tech you can't block. This military cooperation has effectively created a great wall of steel that splits the Eastern Hemisphere. We are witnessing the birth of a new kind of warfare where the objective isn't to win a fair fight, but to make the cost of a conflict so high that the U.S. is forced to simply walk away from the table. The question isn't whether a conflict is coming, it's whether the West even has the tools left to prevent it. This brings us to the final sobering reality of this alliance. It's not just a partnership of necessity, it's a blueprint for a post-Western world. When I look at the sheer scale of what they've built in such a short time, I realize that the unipolar moment hasn't just faded, it has been dismantled piece by piece. Washington's biggest problem isn't a single weapon system or a specific general, it's the fact that their two most determined adversaries have finally learned how to finish each other's sentences. As I watched the latest footage of their joint command centers, I didn't see two desperate nations clinging to each other. I saw a coordinated effort to rewrite the laws of global power. For the first time in nearly a century, the U.S. is facing an alliance that doesn't just want to compete, it wants to replace the system entirely. We are standing at a crossroads where the old strategies of Containment and isolation are being buried under the weight of Russian steel and Iranian ingenuity. The map has changed, the rules have shifted, and the silence coming from the halls of power in D.C. tells me one thing. They know the game has changed, but they're still trying to figure out if they can even afford to play the next round. This is no longer a localized threat. It's the new global reality, and it's only just beginning. So, where does this leave us? I've spent a lot of time analyzing these power shifts, and the conclusion is unavoidable. We are entering a Cold War 2.0, but this time, the enemy isn't a single ideology. It's a combined infrastructure. Washington is now forced to play a defensive game on two massive fronts simultaneously, stretching resources until they hit a breaking point. The nightmare scenario isn't a sudden explosion of war. It's the slow, steady erosion of Western influence until one day we wake up and realize the Middle East and Eastern Europe are operating on a completely different frequency. Russia and Iran have proven that if you're backed into a corner long enough, you don't just survive, you evolve. They've built a fortress out of the very sanctions meant to destroy them. As I close the file on this investigation, one thing is certain. The world we knew, where one superpower called the shots, is gone. In its place is this new defiant axis, and they are just getting started. The question is no longer how Washington will stop them, but whether Washington can even keep up. Ultimately, we have to face the truth that the world has fractured into two distinct realities. On one side, you have the traditional Western alliance still relying on the financial and military structures of the 20th century. On the other, you have this new, battle-hardened engine fueled by Russian heavy industry and Iranian asymmetric brilliance. I've watched as this partnership transitioned from a desperate last resort to a permanent structural pillar of the new global order. They aren't just surviving the pressure anymore. They are using that pressure to weld themselves together into something far more dangerous than the sum of their parts. When I look at the strategic map today, I don't see two separate countries. I see a unified front that stretches from the edge of NATO to the doorstep of the Indo-Pacific. This is Washington's biggest problem because it's a problem with no clear solution. You can't outproduce them without a total shift in domestic economy, and you can't outnegotiate them because they no longer trust the paper the treaties are written on. As I see it, we aren't just watching a military alliance, we're watching the closing of the frontier. The era where the West could project power anywhere at any time without consequence has officially ended. The invisible war for the future has already been won by those who were willing to change the game while we were still trying to master the old rules. What really keeps me awake at night, though, isn't just the hardware or the tunnels, it's the realization that the containment era is dead. We spent decades convinced that if we just tightened the noose enough, these regimes would collapse under their own weight. Instead, the pressure acted like a furnace, forging them into a single, unbreakable unit. I've looked at the data. For the first time in history, the combined electronic warfare capabilities of Moscow and the drone saturation of Tehran have created a no-go zone for Western intervention. We are looking at a future where the U.S. might be forced to ask for permission just to operate in international waters. I'm seeing a massive shift in how the next generation of soldiers is being trained. In the past, Russian tactics were rigid and Iranian tactics were irregular. Now they are cross-pollinating. I've seen evidence of hybrid command centers where the lines between who is pulling the trigger and who is providing the target are completely blurred. This means that in any future conflict, Washington won't know who they are actually fighting until it's far too late. They've successfully turned their isolation into a fortress, and their shared grievances into a weapon of mass disruption. The global chessboard hasn't just changed, it's been replaced by a game we weren't prepared to play. The most unsettling part of this entire shift is the message it sends to the rest of the world. For years, the global narrative was that defying Washington meant certain economic and military ruin, but now every nation currently under the thumb of Western sanctions is watching this partnership with intense interest. I'm seeing a magnet effect where countries are beginning to realize they don't have to choose between submission or collapse. They can choose the third option. They can join the network that Russia and Iran have pioneered. This isn't just about two countries anymore. It's about a growing club of nations that are building a world where the US dollar and the US military no longer hold the final veto. I've looked into the eyes of the strategists who are watching this unfold, and for the first time, I see genuine uncertainty. We used to be able to predict the escalation ladder. We knew exactly how far Moscow or Tehran would go before they'd back down. But those old models are broken. When you have two powers that feel they have nothing left to lose and everything to gain by disrupting the status quo, the old rules of deterrence become a liability. They are no longer playing to not lose. They are playing to reshape reality. And as I see the massive infrastructure projects, the undersea cables, and the joint military bases being planned for the next decade, I realize that Washington isn't just fighting a military alliance, it's fighting against the tide of history. The question is no longer when the conflict will start, but whether we've already lost the opening move. What scares me the most is the realization that this isn't a temporary alliance of convenience. This is a long-term marriage of necessity. I've seen the reports on their new joint manufacturing plants, massive facilities built deep underground, far from the reach of conventional airstrikes. They aren't just shipping crates of parts anymore. They are sharing the fundamental DNA of their military industries. When Russia helps Iran refine its satellite launch capabilities, and Iran helps Russia master the art of cheap, expendable precision weaponry, they are creating a cycle of innovation that moves faster than Western bureaucracy can react. I've spent years studying how these nations operate, and I've never seen them this synchronized. It's like they've finally realized that their individual survival depends on the other's success. This means that any attempt by Washington to pressure one will now be met with an equal and opposite reaction from the other. If the US moves to secure the Persian Gulf, Russia creates a distraction in the Arctic or Eastern Europe. If the West pours resources into Ukraine, Iran ramps up the heat in the Levant. They've mastered the art of the geopolitical pincer, and for the first time in modern history, Washington is the one being squeezed. The world we were told was unipolar is officially a memory. We are now living in the age of the axis of resistance, and the cost of entry into this new world is higher than anyone in the West is willing to admit. As I look at the horizon of the next 5 to 10 years, I see a landscape that is unrecognizable from the one we occupied just a decade ago. We are moving toward a fortress Eurasia. By stitching together their energy grids and their defense networks, Moscow and Tehran have created a massive, self-sustaining hub that is immune to the traditional levers of Western power. I've noticed a disturbing trend in their recent joint communiques. They are no longer talking about defending against the West. They are talking about transitioning beyond it. I've analyzed the deep-sea cable projects and the new transcontinental rail lines they are fast-tracking. This isn't just about moving tanks. It's about moving the center of gravity for the entire planet. While Washington is distracted by domestic debates and aging alliances, this duo is building a hardwired reality where the U.S. Navy is no longer the undisputed guardian of trade. They are effectively building a world where the American gatekeeper is bypassed entirely. When you realize that the weapons they are developing today are designed to protect this new Silk Road of steel and sensors, you understand the true scale of the threat. This is a total re-engineering of the global map, And the most terrifying part is that it's already too late to stop the foundation from being poured. We are witnessing the birth of a shadow superpower, one with two heads, one heart, and a single relentless goal: to ensure that the era of Western dominance never returns. The deeper I look into this, the more I realize that the real danger isn't just what they are building, but what they are destroying. They are dismantling the very concept of the West as the world's ultimate authority. I've been tracking the flow of sensitive technology, stuff like quantum computing and advanced encryption, that is now moving freely between Moscow and Tehran. This isn't just about bigger bombs. It's about a digital iron curtain. They are creating an internet and a financial network that are completely invisible to our intelligence agencies. For the first time, we are truly flying blind. I recently saw a briefing that suggested the US might have to rethink its entire global troop presence because of this. If Russia and Iran can project power together, every single American base in the Middle East and Europe becomes a liability rather than an asset. They've essentially turned our own strength against us. By creating a situation where any move we make could trigger a two-front war, they've paralyzed the Pentagon. I used to think of these two as rogue states, but as I watch them coordinate their moves with the precision of a Swiss watch, I realize they aren't rogues anymore. They are the new architects of a world where the US is just another player on the board, not the one who owns it. The silence from Washington isn't just a lack of strategy. It's the sound of a superpower realizing it has finally met its match. This leads us to the point of no return. I've started to see a shift in how these two nations talk about their sacrifices. They no longer view the sanctions or the isolation as a burden. They see it as a baptism. By being cut off from the West, they were forced to develop a level of self-reliance that most modern nations can't even imagine. While we were perfecting the art of the global supply chain, they were perfecting the art of the survival economy. Now they are exporting that blueprint. I'm seeing evidence that they are teaching other countries how to build ghost fleets to move oil and how to create domestic versions of every critical technology. When I look at the recent joint aerospace ventures between the Kremlin and the Iranian Space Agency, I see the final piece of the puzzle. They are building a shared eye in the sky that Washington can't blind. If they can track our every move from orbit while we struggle to see through their new layers of electronic fog, the tactical advantage shifts entirely to them. I've realized that the reason this is Washington's biggest problem isn't just because of the weapons, it's because Russia and Iran have successfully turned their weakness into a new kind of asymmetric strength. They have proven that you don't need to be richer than the United States to defeat its strategies. You just need to be more resilient and more connected to each other than anyone thought possible. We are watching the manual on modern warfare being rewritten in real time, and unfortunately, we aren't the ones holding the pen. As I see it, the most chilling realization isn't that they've built a bridge between their capitals, it's that they've built a bridge between their futures. I've noticed a shift in the way their leaders interact. It's no longer the stiff, formal diplomacy of two countries who don't trust each other. It's the coordinated rhythm of two partners who have realized that if one falls, the other is next. They've successfully synchronized their clocks. While we are debating the next election cycle or the next budget bill, they are thinking in decades. They are building infrastructure, pipelines, and command structures that are designed to outlast every politician currently sitting in Washington. So, where does this leave us? I've spent months connecting these dots, and the picture that emerges is nothing short of a global earthquake. We aren't just looking at a trade deal or a temporary alliance. We are witnessing the official end of the era, where Washington could act without fear of a coordinated counterstrike. By merging Russia's eyes in the sky with Iran's daggers on the ground, they've created a predatory system that feeds on American hesitation. every minute we spend debating our next move, their joint command centers are already uploading the coordinates for the next strike. I look at the latest satellite feeds and I don't see two countries anymore. I see a single unified shadow stretching from the Arctic to the Persian Gulf. They've built a fortress that sanctions can't crack and that conventional missiles can't intimidate. Washington's biggest problem isn't that they might lose a battle, it's that they've already lost the monopoly on the future. The American century didn't end with a massive explosion or a signed treaty. It ended the moment Moscow and Tehran realized that together they could turn the lights out on Western dominance forever. As I close this investigation, one chilling realization remains. For the first time in 100 years, the U.S. is the one playing catch-up. The hunter has become the watched, the superpower has become the target, and the two outcasts we tried to bury have just finished building a world that doesn't need our permission to exist. The board has been flipped, the rules have been rewritten, and the silence you hear from D.C. isn't a strategy. It's the sound of a giant realizing it's finally been cornered. The age of the Axis is here, and the cost of the next move might be more than the West can afford to pay. The question is no longer if the world will change. It's how much of it will be left when the dust finally settles.